And thanks everybody for joining. So what I want to talk about in the beginning here before passing it off to Cam is high level, the background on ultimately what we're trying to solve for. What are some of the larger economic and industry issues and challenges that we're seeing, that the reason why we built this product and what we were trying to address there. And a lot of it comes down to, if we've been noticing a shift over time and a lot of in the economy, and a lot of people call it the experience economy. And really the idea comes more around how consumers are engaging with businesses have changed over time and what the expectations of consumers has changed over time, where it's not necessarily always just the product itself that draws a consumer in, but also the experience that they're getting from the actual company. Some people are saying, I can't hear. Are you guys able to hear me, Cam? Can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right.
Okay.
So if you're having trouble hearing, maybe check your audio settings and all of that. But ultimately, how consumers are engaging with businesses have changed over time and what their expectations are. And if you go to the next slide, we know a lot of the businesses that are doing this really well. We see, it's common in like the Amazon and the Ubers, you see this type of thing, right? So for example, for me, I just had a baby recently. And before we had a baby, Amazon was advertising to my wife maternity stuff, right? Once we had the baby, Amazon was already, you can bet, advertising diapers to us, already put in front of us before we even said anything. And so that's a very obvious one that you see in this industry. But outside of, we see it a lot also in more classic companies like the Ritz-Carlton is an example, right? A company that's been around for a long time. How have they been able to essentially stay relevant and even innovate? Each person that comes to a Ritz-Carlton, they're constantly trying to understand what they like, to create an experience for them that gets better and better. And so that's really, if you go to the next slide, really the crux of what these companies are trying to address, again, comes down to how these consumers are engaging with businesses and how it's changed over time. There's some really interesting numbers that actually surprised me when I saw them of what these consumer expectations are. And right now, if 3 out of the 4 customers that might be engaging with you as an agent or as a brokerage, they expect businesses to know what their interests are. If I'm, looking to buy a house in Washington, D.C., I expect the local brokerage to know what my interests are. That's a pretty crazy number and a crazy expectation. But that's what they see in other industries. And the consumer is the same in the real estate industry. They have that expectation. But outside, not only do I expect a business to know what my interests are and my needs are, but 62% of them expect a company to interact with me based on my behaviors and actions and to change those interactions with me based on my behavior. It's this crazy concept that, again, other industries have known for a long time and augmented their businesses to address for a long time. The real estate industry has been a little bit slower to be able to do that. But again, it's what is the consumer expecting from the business that they're ultimately working with? And if you go to the next slide, real estate has been moving in this direction. It's been moving in this direction for a long time because, again, the consumer that's buying something from Amazon is the consumer that's also buying something in the real estate industry, but the expectations are still the same. So we know a lot of the companies that have been doing this. I have a couple examples here of companies that have been doing this well. The Compasses of the world ultimately have pretty significant market share in a lot of their areas. They're able to own that end-to-end experience. They own their technology from top to bottom. So they're actually trying to create that full end-to-end experience for their customers, starting from the actual search itself in many of their areas, taking on mortgage companies and title companies so they can cap off the whole experience there. Zillow is a great example of, a classic tech company that is starting to become a brokerage now, also doing some selling, doing some iBuying also. So not only do they own that front end experience where someone is starting this, the buying process there, but now they're actually starting to engage them throughout the buying cycle altogether. If you go to the next one, one of the interesting ones I think is actually Redfin. They don't have a ton of necessarily sales and market share necessarily, but what's interesting about them as a tech company that's also a brokerage, it also does buying and selling. Not only are they really good at selling listings, right, in a short period of time. But one of the things that's always been really tried and true for more classic brokerages has been that relationship, right? So a lot of brokerages look at it and say, look, there's going to be disruptors in the industry that come in, but at the end of the day, the agent and the brokerage always tend to own that relationship. But if you look at Redfin, they're actually getting pretty significant repeat business, So it's not always guaranteed that the brokerage or the agent will own that relationship necessarily anymore. And so what do these companies ultimately have in common outside of, some of these other parts with like funding and all those type of things? Really, a lot of it has to do with they're ultimately creating and focusing on what is that customer experience. When someone is engaging with that business, when someone's engaging with their brokerage or their business, what is the experience that customer is getting? So they're creating these end-to-end journeys that when someone engages with them, they're going through an experience and they're understanding based on the behavior of these contexts, they're able to actually leverage the data that's coming from it to inform their decisions of how they're going to engage with the consumer going forward. This has also helped them monetize the whole transaction, right? The sale itself, the buying and selling process itself, but also ancillary services, right? Mortgage and insurance and title. How are all these businesses doing a really good job of engaging the consumer and attaching all these other services? It's keeping that consumer within their ecosystem, within their that customer journey. You're hitting the right person at the right time when it comes to actually engaging them about these other services. So if you go to that next slide, and what people think about, okay, what is the big differences that you're going to ultimately see here in terms of outcomes? And I think what was actually surprising in the last 3 years, companies have grown pretty significantly over this time. We had the downturn during COVID, but then we've recovered pretty well. And more of the classic brokerages have grown pretty well. But when you look at the companies that have been doing what we're talking about very well, owning that customer experience, they're growing exponentially, right? And so if you go to the next slide here, I always liked this quote, but it's one of these that came from Gary Keller, saying like, look, we're growing, we're doing well, but he said we're losing so slowly we think we're winning, right? We don't even realize that these other companies are catching up very quickly. And again, a lot of it comes down to how are they engaging with that consumer? How are they engaging them in a way that not only is personalized to them, it's scalable, but they're understanding what that consumer wants and they're changing their interaction with that consumer in a similar way that consumer expects in other industries, bringing it over to the real estate side. So from here, how are we ultimately addressing that? I'm going to pass it off to Cam here on explaining how we're actually going about it. Thanks.
Thanks, Aaron. That's a really good overview of what we see happening in the industry right now. And really what we're focusing on from the definition here and the solution is that our solution is to focus on how you should be nurturing your contacts. It's the idea of being intentional about growing the relationships you have by staying top of mind with people in your database with content that's relevant to him and her. So that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit here on our side of the equation. So Brian, can you go on to the next slide for me? So a lot of the questions that we get from customers on the customer success side of things, when we explain something like this, they wonder, why should we be focusing on those things? Why are those things important to me, my marketing team, and our brokerage? And Aaron gave a really great example earlier about having his first baby and Amazon knowing exactly what he was going to be needing before the baby was born and then everything thereafter. That's a perfect example of nurturing from a company that we see today. But an even more basic example is that all of us here today probably received an email from our favorite brand in the last day, 2 days, or 3 days about some new product or event. And we eventually clicked on that link. Then what happened after we clicked on that link? We got another email and perhaps another after that. That's a simple form of nurturing that literally every single company is doing today. And what's been really interesting about that is that we've got years of experience and data that shows us that it's been found that steadily nurturing your contacts with relevant content not only increases response rates, so it's better than just sending off a one-time email to people, it's sending emails over an extended period of time that helps you increase those response rates, but it's also 50% more likely to produce a sales-ready lead. And who in our business wouldn't want to see that from the contacts that are in our agent's database? So what we actually see in having these conversations with brokerages across the country, and Brian, if you can move on to the next slide, is that we see two core problems or two issues that are brought up fairly commonly. The first one of these, it's the adoption of technology. And this is no different from the brokerages we work with across the country. We hear this as a constant refrain in our client conversations. Probably not a big secret, but technology adoption is hard work. Even if you're really well prepared as a brokerage, as a marketing team, and you've communicated the need for everything down to your agents, adoption is flat out hard work. And what that means from a technology perspective is that the technology that you and your agents are using each day can't simply just be good enough, right? It can't just be something that checks the box. It really does need to seamlessly be integrated with all of the tools that your agents and marketing teams are using each day. That also means that we need to cut through the noise, right? There's a lot of competing priorities each day for your marketing team's time, your agent's time. So we got to make sure that the tools that are being used each day, they're packaged around things together, right? And we do a lot of this here at ActivePipe today to make that sort of stuff easier, where we've got CRM integrated so contacts are in the right place. We've got your properties integrated, so all of those are available for a quick drag and drop to build out a new listing email. And we even include agent roster, so it's easy to add people at any time you need. Those are the things that we talk about here from an adoption perspective, where each of them feed each other so that you've got the right data and information that your agents and your marketing team need to successfully utilize those platforms. The second bit of this is the common refrain that we get around one-off emails. And we see a lot of this from brokerages across the country. And it really focuses on the idea that a one-off email is somehow easier to scale for agents, or it's an easier way to go about things. And there's a classic stat that people talk about from a sales engagement perspective, and that it takes about 8 touch points on average to close a new lead. So that means for us, from an email marketing perspective, we need to be focusing on a longer sales cycle with our customers, right? The real estate industry is no different in regards to any others, right? Not everyone's going to be at a point to make a buying or selling decision in that moment. So oftentimes that one-off email can come maybe at the wrong time. It's not as relevant to the recipient. And oftentimes it's just generic and impersonal. And it's really hard for a marketing team to be able to scale those sorts of things to all of the agents across your brokerage, right? Because there could be 100, there could be 200 or 1,000 contacts in an agent's database. So we want to make sure we find a solution that's really scalable for not only a single agent or a team, but your entire brokerage. So that is why we built Nurture. Nurture is a way that you as a brokerage and your agents are able to connect with a lead all the way from that first inquiry to the point that they're ready to list with your agent through really customized journeys that our team of real estate marketing experts have put together, and our CS team will deploy within your brokerage. So you're spending really less time crafting your email marketing, but you're getting more results out of that because we've got content that's proven to engage your consumers and get them from that lead to listing much quicker. And speaking of results around some of our automated campaigns to date, we've been working with, and Brian, if you keep going to the next slide, we've been working with a large brokerage for over a year that came to us with a problem. And their problem was that they wanted to provide ActivePipe as a service to their agents to help them build relationships with their sphere and their past clients. But their brokerage has historically really not been successful in adopting technology and getting agents to use it. And so that led to them having a little bit of a shotgun approach to how they're going to conduct their email marketing, where they were doing bits and pieces of content for individual agents, but they really didn't have that cohesive strategy for how there would be developing content for everyone at the brokerage. And a little bit after a year later, working with that same exact customer, we've had about 25% of their agents consistently sending campaigns, monthly campaigns, newsletters, or anything like that with ActivePipe. And that's coming from scratch, no one really doing anything, to getting over 25% of their agents sending at least that monthly newsletter out each month. What's also been really fantastic to see is that we've got another third outside of that initial 25% who are sending automated campaigns that are nurturing buyers, they're nurturing prospective sellers, or even some of their past clients as well. So the adoption has gone from literally 0 up to 40% of their agents doing something within ActivePipe each month, where the marketing team is providing a service for them. And what they've been able to do with that is to generate over 150 new leads, including 100 new potential sellers from their agents' database. So we're delivering more results with less work by setting up the campaigns in advance and nurturing our consumers and our contacts through that entire sales cycle.
So now I'm going to hand it off back to Aaron, who will be going into what nurture actually looks like.
Yeah. So do you want to jump into? So these are just some examples of different personas that you might see in someone's database, whether it's an agent database or brokerage database. But the idea is that, if you click on this one, right, this one's a first-time home buyer, right? If you go to 2 down from there, there's a potential seller, right? The idea is that ultimately you have all these different personas within your database. If a first-time home buyer is getting similar content as a potential seller, there's something wrong there, right? Because they're ultimately at different points in their buying process. They have different needs there. So they should be getting different experiences. Again, it goes back to customizing the experience for each individual. But if you go back to that first-time home buyer, the idea is even within the first-time home buyers, each individual also needs to have their own custom experience, right? Each one needs to have something that's tailored for them based on what their interests are. So it's not only targeting them from where they're at now, but it's also how their behavior changes. So if you click on that first email there, right, this is just an example of one of the flows that we have created as part of the Nurture package. Is all the content that comes along with it comes from all these best practices and what works around the industry. This is an example of one that can be fully automated on behalf of the agents, or if you're an agent, can be fully automated for yourself. But this person maybe came in from an open house, or this first-time home buyer maybe came in as a lead. First thing it sends out to them is an email that's engaging with them. It's custom for them, right? So each person initially gets that custom outreach, but the key here is based on how they interact with this, that tells us what future emails should look like. So in that first email, maybe they clicked on a particular article that tells us they like this type of content. So the next email that goes out is going to be even more tailored for them, right? Okay, here's articles that are tailored to what they clicked on earlier. If they click on this one, that might tell us, hey, they actually want to get listings sent to them every Tuesday. So the next one, they might start getting listings sent to them regularly that are more and more custom for them every time they click on it. The point is that they're going down this unique journey that only starts off unique for them based on what their interests are, based on the type of persona they are. But the campaigns actually change over time based on the behavior of these contacts. And that's critical. When we talked about those stats we saw earlier, how majority of consumers expect you to know what their needs are, but also to change how you interact with them based on their behaviors. This is a perfect example of that, right? At some point in time, you see there, go to tips right after this sent listings, right? We might want to direct them over to the mortgage side, right? This is when you start incorporating those tertiary services. For first-time home buyer, you might not be hitting them up right away with it, and you don't want to do it too late. So it's all the point is hitting the right time with the right messaging for when it makes sense based on their behavior. So this is just an example of one that takes them down these unique journeys. First-time home buyer is going to get very different experience than a potential seller versus your sphere of influence. So these again are just 4 examples of different personas you might see within your database. And we have a ton that's already pre-built for you. But the idea is create this system that can easily engage with your customers based on what their interests are and can engage with them based on what their behaviors are. So each one of them are getting that unique experience. If we go back to that first-time home buyer lead as an example, if an agent's talking to this first-time home buyer and that's a lead that comes in, you can bet that 5 other agents are also talking at the same time, right? How is that buyer deciding who are they ultimately going to end up working with? It's who's ultimately providing that valuable experience for them. And that's the idea, is ultimately have this all set up in a way that's very automated and simple.